Hi, I'm Ed from Crystal Clear Aquatics. I'm here on this beautiful and sunny but frankly rather cold morning, undertaking some winter chores on the pond. Now, depending on what type of pond you have, whether it's a sort of a nature pond, a wildlife pond, just a typical fish pond, or perhaps a koi pond, there are different jobs that you would do, seasonal jobs at this time of year. Now this is what I would class as just sort of a basic domestic pond. It's got a few fish, lots of plants, lots of natural wildlife, frogs and newts, etc. And chores on something like this would be predominantly plant-based. At this time of year, all of the foliage around the pond wants to be cut right back. Now I'm going to do this in a couple of stages. Some of the reed mace here, the typer for example, and lots of the irises are really past it, and I shall trim those down. But there are some other plants. We've got some evergreen equisetum over here, which are still putting on a show and looking quite nice. So I'll leave these until next month. Once we've had a few more frosts, then they'll get cut right back as well. Water lily pads, any unused flower buds up at the surface, this all wants to be trimmed right back. And the idea for this is that we want to reduce as much as possible organic matter decomposing in the pond. So decaying leaves that are falling into the pond from trees, plants and foliage that are dying back, all of this as it starts to decompose in the pond is going to produce nutrients, and nutrients are then going to encourage algae, blanketweed and green water to grow. So we want to try and keep as stable an environment as possible in a pond, and we want to try and reduce nutrient content as much as possible. Now once this is done, it can look a little bit bare. If you've got fish in the pond, there might not be quite so much cover, so you might want to make sure that you've got a couple of sort of hidey holes, a bit of earthenware pot, some clay pipe. You can create a platform with a few bricks and a stone or something over the top, just somewhere for the fish to be able to hide to. Herons can still be very active during the winter months, and it's much easier for a heron obviously to catch fish when the pond is clear, and it's more likely to be clear in winter and when there's less cover. But it's important that we do this with a pond. You don't want to be too sort of precious about removing leaves and sludge and bits and pieces at this time of year in the pond. Again, it's worth getting rid of as much as possible, or sorry, I should say it's worth getting rid of most of it, but leaving small areas, particularly of leaf litter, and a little area of silt and muck, because frogs and newts and other pond inhabitants like to, hide amongst that. I mean, frogs will be overwintering in the pond and they'll be using the leaf litter as something to hide in amongst. So from a wildlife point of view, we don't want to be too clean. Other jobs that are worth thinking about are potentially raising your pond pump. Now in this particular pond, this is the deepest section, this is a very shallow pond, but the pump is over off on the shelf in a slightly shallower area. And that's because during the winter months, it's the base of the pond which is the mildest area, particularly if you've got fish. There's always a layer of slightly warmer water at the bottom of the pond, and it cools as it gets to the top. And it's in these warmer layers that the fish like to overwinter. If you've got a pump and you've got moving water, and you're pumping water from the deepest section of the pond, the warmest section, and you're then bringing that up to a cascade, a waterfall, a filtration system at the surface where it's going to cool much quicker, and then returning that water back into the pond, you're effectively cooling the pond entirely. So if your pump is at the base, at the deepest part of the pond, it can be good practice to raise this up into the shallower water, just on the shelf. When this is our British climate, it's a little bit hit and miss. We don't always get particularly cold winters. But if it's easy to do so, it's worth raising that pump just into the shallows and leaving it there for the winter months, and then you can drop it back down into the deeper water, springtime. Another important job at this time of year is to make sure that if you've got it, your life support equipment, your filtration, your UVC, your pond pump are all clean and working effectively. Because as it starts to get colder still, it's not particularly pleasant getting out there and doing work like that on the filtration system. So it's best to do it now. Now, depending on what kind of filtration system you've got, if you're doing sort of weekly, fortnightly, monthly backwashes on pressurised systems, you can continue to do those right through the winter months. but I like to overhaul the system and give it a really good thorough clean for this time of year. So I'll be taking the foams out, giving them a proper manual clean, vacuuming out the canisters and the base of the filtration systems, just to make sure that they're operating as efficiently as possible for the winter months. Even though everything slows down in the pond, fish are less active, in turn produce less waste, and so the filtration system is under less demand. It's still important to try and keep it working efficiently because, again, back to the nutrient content, as the plants in the pond are not doing anything, there's nothing in the pond that's really going to be using nutrients and competing with algae. And although lower daylight hours, cooler temperatures, colder water temperatures are going to reduce algae growth, it doesn't stop it completely, particularly in our current sort of climate where we get mild spells during the winter months, and blanket weed can still be an issue right through the winter months. So it's worth making sure that the filtration system is operating as efficiently as possible to try and keep this nutrient content down. At this time of year I carry out what I call my sort of comprehensive autumn-winter servicing. And it's a bit of a package. It involves vacuuming out the pond to reduce the levels of sludge and slurry, getting rid of some of the leaf litter, cutting back all of the plants, overhauling filtration systems, making sure the pumps are clean. I mean, at this time of year, again, submersible pumps in the pond, they're going to be covered in leaves and bits and pieces, so they're going to have to be continually cleaned so that they're operating efficiently. And another thing that I like to do also is to add some water treatments to a pond. Again, to help prevent the blanket weed from growing, I like to use an anti-blanket weed treatment. In this case, I use something called Blanket Answer, made by Cloverleaf. Other products are available, but this is a particular one that I'm really fond of. At one time, I don't know if it still is, but at one time it was the UK's most popular blanket weed treatment. And when I spent many years working behind the counter, this was a product that customer feedback was always excellent, and it's reassuring to know that it works with other people as well. So I've always used this as a staple product during any servicing visits, sort of prophylactically, to prevent blanket weed from forming in the first place. So I shall be using an anti-blanket weed treatment in here, and that should carry over really for the winter months until spring. And one other thing I like to do, if you've got livestock in your pond, if you've got fish, as the water temperatures cool, fish being cold-blooded, their metabolism and their immune system works in conjunction with the water temperature. So they become more susceptible to potential issues like fungal growth, white spot, bacterial infections, ulcers, that kind of thing. So again, as a precaution, I would add a sort of a broad spectrum, a general tonic to the pond. Tetrapond Medifin is a popular, sort of easy to get hold of treatment. I personally use NT Labs FMG, which is a mixture of formalin and malachite, a little bit of a stronger treatment. And again, just as a preventative measure, a light dose to carry the fish through the winter months and just to help if they were to get any issues. And that's something that I would do in spring again as the water temperature starts to warm up as well. If you're getting in ponds at this time of year, wear the right clothing. It is blooming cold, I have to say. I mean, the water temperature today is now just below 10 degrees. It doesn't sound terrible, but when you're in it for a couple of hours or so, it does get cold. These PVC waders don't really offer me an awful lot of insulation. I've got a thicker pair of neoprene ones and some neoprene gloves I can wear, but it gets really cold. But again, if I can get these jobs done before we get too much ice on the pond and before it gets too cold, all the better. Right, I shall carry on and get this lot trimmed back. Just to recap, most important thing in winter, trim back plants, maintain your pump and your filter, and remove a large portion of the sludge, the sediment, the leaves, etc. that have accumulated. I hope this helps. I'm Ed for Crystal Clear Aquatics. Thanks very much for watching. I'll catch you in the next pond.